Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Eaton Arrowsmith virtual tour with myself, Howard Eaton, and my colleague, Josh Poirier. We're excited to have you here today, and I look forward to answering questions and answering them after our talk. My background is, as Josh, you'll see when he talks a bit about himself, has a background in learning disabilities. I was diagnosed in 1972, quite a few, almost more than a half century ago, with dyslexia. And because of my difficulty with reading and spelling and writing, my wish wasn't to be an educator, but to be an NHL hockey star. As you can see, me standing with my pajamas and my uniform over my pajamas. And if you look closely, you see my little sister, Daphne, who's jealous that I'm getting my picture taken with my hockey equipment. And one day I'd play for the Vancouver Canucks. But unfortunately, that never happened. If it did, we might have won a whole bunch of Stanley Cups, but it didn't happen. And my journey, ironically, moved into education. It certainly was the last thing in my parents' mind that Howie would become an educator. In fact, early on, they were looking at investing in a farm outside of Vancouver so I might have a living. This is how far parents go to try to find some sort of possibilities for their children if they think that educational achievement wasn't going to happen. But my journey in education started when I was trying to do my undergraduate degree at University of British Columbia in psychology. And I was struggling at university with my reading speed, my comprehension ability, and there wasn't any disability services back then. So I had to advocate for myself to get a language exemption. I had to learn strategies to try to get by in my degree of psychology. In fact, it wasn't easy. I failed several times at my attempts. Until I learned that the only way I was going to get by was to work 24/7, reread my textbooks 4 times over, and just plug along. And eventually I had to actually fight for a language exemption. The University of British Columbia at that time required a foreign language. And as anyone knows with dyslexia, foreign languages are near impossible. So eventually I had to protest their requirement and go to the Vancouver Sun, which was a major newspaper, and CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corp television, and fight my case. And eventually got a language exemption at the University of British Columbia, and they started a policy providing exemptions for those with dyslexia. So my journey was one of always trying to battle the system to try to accommodate my dyslexia. I got my degree in psychology at UBC and went on to Bosch University and did a master's in special education, which was almost less difficult in that I understood my learning profile, I understood the work ethic I had to put into it, the hours of studying that I had to do in order to get grades that I needed to get through my degree. And what was interesting too, once I had my certification in teaching and special ed, my master's in special education, I think myself as a practitioner, I was able to understand the child who had a struggle probably more than most other practitioners, and that I lived and struggled the way they were doing. So I built a really good educational practice with the group of psychologists in Vancouver, where we conducted psychoeducational assessments, and we began testing children and adults with learning disabilities and ADHD. And it was at that time in my life, more than 20 years ago, that I ran into the work of Barbara Arrowsmith Young and her idea of neuroplasticity. Early in my career, I was trained that the brain was fixed, that you're born sort of with a genetic blueprint, and your strengths and weaknesses were determined early. And because of that, you had to accept your cognitive deficits, and you had to find ways to work around them. which again were accommodations like extra time on tests, technology, being able to use a keyboard, and metacognitive strategies like how can you practice reading comprehension better by 4-step strategies. And that was my life until I came across the work of Barbara Arrowsmith Young. I was testing a group of families for learning disabilities, and they asked me, have I heard of the Arrowsmith program? And I had not. It was based out of Toronto, Canada. I was in Vancouver, Canada. It had been around for quite some time. I think about that time it had been around about 2 decades. And the parents asked me to pay attention to it and give them my feedback on the program. In fact, I was so interested, I met with Barbara Arrowsmith Young in Vancouver and was intrigued about this idea that the brain can change itself. But remember, I was immersed in this idea that the brain is like a computer, fixed genetically. And so the leap that the brain can change was a big one. But I read the research she gave me about brain change, and I was intrigued with her work enough to fly to Toronto to meet with her in 2004, in December 2004, almost 20 years ago. And I met with her, I met with the students, I met with the parents. And to be honest, it was one of those moments in life, a aha moment, where you say, what am I doing? There might be a better option for so many families who have children or adults with learning disabilities or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that if you can directly improve the cognitive deficit through this cognitive training, what I understood is once you remove the deficit, you have a brand new way of looking at the world. If your processing speed improves, if your fluid intelligence improves, if your working memory improves, you're able to engage in your sensory world with better ease. So you can sit in a classroom, process lectures, take notes, keep up with the pace of instruction, keep up with the pace of workload. You're not as overwhelmed. And I said, this is something I got to pay attention to. And maybe I should start a school in Vancouver. And that would probably be a really helpful thing for so many families. And so we brought the program to Vancouver, Canada, and started our first year in September of 2005. And one of the things I wanted to do at the same time was get research done on neuroplasticity and the Arrowsmith program, try to get brain imaging studies done through the neuroscience department at the University of British Columbia. And that was part of my effort to try to understand what was happening in the brains of those who were engaged in the Arrowsmith program. What I saw in my assessments were, in terms of cognitive change, was certainly faster cognitive efficiency in terms of reading speed, math speed, writing speed. The brain was just a faster processing unit. And I wanted to understand why. And so research was conducted both at UBC and also at Southern Illinois University. The researcher at UBC was Dr. Lara Boyd and her colleagues. And at Southern Illinois University was Dr. Greg Rose and his colleagues. And what we wanted to do is take one of the programs called Symbol Relations, which Josh or Poirier will talk about more shortly, and look at what would happen to the brain in a 6-week intensive program or a 3-month, and study it as well over 3-month segments with brain imaging. And so what was exciting, we were able to create the Symbol Relations program and have it presented in an fMRI machine. So essentially, Symbol Relations is an analog clock. And again, Josh will show it to you. We were able to have it designed so a student could go into a functional MRI machine and actually do the exercise while their brain is being imaged, so we could see what was going on. And we wanted to study the brain, before treatment and after treatment, and also look at, what's the typical healthy controls look like in terms of brain functioning. One of the things that we noticed right away was there was extensive hyperconnectivity in the brain of a child with a learning disability prior to doing the Arrowsmith program. Both hyperconnectivity were present and hypoconnectivity. Essentially, that means the wiring between the different areas of the brain were hyper-connected. There was lots of activity occurring. In the slide, diffusion tensor imaging slide of a human brain, that's in fact a human brain that you're looking at. You see these colored, what look like wires, but essentially they're large-scale brain networks that communicate from one area of the brain to another area of the brain. And they're connected through this, this electrical impulse connectivity. And if you have a learning disability, you likely have overconnectivity, meaning you're using so much area of your brain to try to figure out what's going on. And that's quite exhausting in terms of trying to function in a classroom or socially or at work. If you have hyperconnectivity, essentially your brain isn't working fluently and efficiently. And so we wanted to see, after an intensive 6 weeks of treatment, can those connectivities change? And guess what? What we saw was this connectivity moving to normal network connectivity that compares more to the average brain. This was only in 6 weeks of intensive intervention that we began to see these changes in neural network connectivity. We also saw improvements in fluid intelligence. This is your ability to look at novel information and understand what's going on with something you have no previous experience with. It's a form of intelligence. It was also something that I had seen in my students that had gone to Arrowsmith when I was doing psych ed assessments before and after. And so to see a researcher, an independent third-party researcher, find the same information that I was finding when I was doing pre and post tests on Arrowsmith kids was exciting. There are also better social emotional outcomes with this research, lower anxiety, reduced depression, improved quality of life. And we know that in the research in mental health, that if you have cognitive deficits like cognitive efficiency, processing speed, there's a greater likelihood of mental health issues. And that was also something we've seen in our schools, where kids were reporting better emotional states than they were prior to engaging in the program. What parents are often interested in is what is the academic outcomes. It's nice to have all the brain change, the improved large-scale brain network connectivity, but what happens academically? And again, this was done by University of Southern Illinois by Dr. Greg Rose and colleagues, looking at what happened with academic performance and cognitive abilities after one academic year in the Arrowsmith program. And again, this matched my earlier case studies that I did with my own clients who had gone to Eaton Arrowsmith when I had my psychoeducational assessment center. So again, what I was seeing privately matched what these third-party researchers who had no connection to Arrowsmith other than studying it were seeing. And that is issues like cognitive processing speed, or how quickly you can analyze information, and your essential memory capabilities were improving significantly on the cognitive side of the assessment. And then on the academic side, you saw better academic fluency, which means speed of reading, speed of being able to do math facts, speed of being able to create sentences. So essentially, this connectivity in the brain, improved connectivity, a reduction in hyperconnectivity, makes the brain a more efficient producer of information. So they can read faster, understand what they're reading at a more efficient capability because their fluid intelligence is going up, and they're able to do calculations in their mind, math calculations faster, and get thoughts on paper faster. And this is all at very significant levels in terms of research design. And so essentially what Arrowsmith is doing with these students who are engaging in the program, even in a 6 to 8 week program, is improving these large-scale brain networks so they're no longer acting sort of chaotically, but more fluidly with better connectivity. This in turn allows the brain to process and analyze information from their sensory world with better efficiency, which allows them to read information, get paper information on paper more efficiently, and in the mathematical world, be able to do better, math calculations in their head. And what child wouldn't want to be able to sit in class and understand what's happening in real time? And I can't, over the thousands of kids I used to test prior to Arrowsmith, one of their biggest frustrations were they'd be sitting in class, say it's an English class, trying to understand the information that's being presented by an academic teacher and not getting it and feeling frustrated, not being able to take the notes from the board, not being able to listen to what's being said instructionally, not being able to read the material that's passed to them in a timely manner in class. And then what we do to them is we assign them a resource room where they have to do the information that they couldn't do in class and often be retaught that information. And if it's even more complicated, that doesn't make the biggest difference. Parents have to hire tutors after school to teach them the subject matter that's being taught in school. And the reason is that the neurological efficiency is not there. And this is why this needs to be addressed first in terms of looking at intervention. We need to address cognitive abilities first in children with learning disabilities, ADHD, and even autism spectrum disorder or brain injury, because all those categories have a common problem, which is executive functioning, which essentially is attention, processing speed, working memory, and reasoning capabilities, planning and organizing. And this is why the Arrowsmith program has proven to be effective across so many different types of learning challenges. And overall, if you can improve this cognitive efficiency, you get improved quality of life. These are three different independent researchers, one from University of British Columbia, one from the University of Calgary, another from Southern Illinois University. And essentially, they're saying the same thing, that what they saw in their research is that if you can improve cognitive efficiency, you have better capacity to learn new things, which is a really important cognitive skill for success in school and life. Because again, many of these individuals with these disabilities are feeling left behind because cognitively they can't keep pace. University of Calgary stated, strengthening cognitive functions presumed to underlie academic achievement deficits improves reading, math, writing by targeting the cause, the cognitive deficit, rather than the symptoms. So, yes, you can give accommodations and strategies and technology, but those don't deal with the cause of the issue, which is the cognitive deficit. And what's exciting about the Arrowsmith program, it deals with the cause. And finally, the researcher at Southern Illinois University said there is neuroplasticity as a function of the Arrowsmith training, which generally improves performance. So do precise Arrowsmith cognitive exercises activate and functionally change particular areas of networks of the brain? The answer is yes. And this is, I think, the forefront of research in the field of learning disabilities that we have seen in a long time. It's really exciting to be part of it. So I pass it to you, Josh. I know many of them want to see one of the exercises in action, which is the one that was studied here by these researchers. So take it away, Josh.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Howard. So like Howard, I woke up one morning with, well, I didn't really wake up that morning, but I woke up one morning to a series of tests in high school. My folks thought, why is this kid not doing as well as he should be? We see higher potential than what we're seeing in his grades. And I had a series of tests to discover that I had ADD, and that was kind of holding me back at that time. I was lucky enough at the time, though, to be able to throw baseball very fast. So that kind of opened the doors for me to be able to get a scholarship, but to be able to put the work in to be able to be eligible to play, that was a different story. That took a lot of time to be able to get the grades up, be able to accept the scholarship. And I started seeing the amount of work that goes into success for kids with learning disability and what that entails. And I saw that in university, where I would spend 7-8 hours a day in the library just to do as well as my peers. And this was kind of my Arrowsmith program at that time, just being processing so much information. And I don't wish that on anybody. To have to put that much time in, my quality of life wasn't where it could be. I had a goal to graduate at the time, which a lot of families I talk to now, like that is their goal, to graduate and move on to new things. But I was lucky. I had a passion for wanting to get into education, and I was a late bloomer. And within my master's, I was able to excel at that point based on the amount of time I was putting in to develop my brain, which, some people just don't have the time, interest, and ability to do that. After a few years of teaching at Howard School in Vancouver, we moved into some brain injury research. And this, for me, really led to having concussions growing up as a kid, playing as many sports as I did, a huge interest in the emerging fields of education and neurology. And I was quick to find out that these fields really aren't that related, right? There is a big gap in how we create our education and our curriculum and how the brain actually learns and develops. And I'm seeing this more and more, and I'm hearing this more and more from families that come to us. Because really, there's accommodations are there for you if you have a learning disability. For me in high school, I saw as soon as that label came on that it was no longer the teacher's fault. I could go in another resource room and learn with someone else and figure out I could have some extra time on the test, but the teachers kind of weren't there to really push you in the same way. A lot of students, they rely on these support networks that like, okay, I've got this resource room, I've got this extra teacher, I don't really have to push myself in class because I know I can do it with them later. Or they've got tutors that come to the house a couple of times a week to help them out, or virtually these days. And these support networks aren't always there for your entire life. And most likely when you finish high school, when you finish school, these support networks disappear. So now what? You've taken the life jacket away and you're trying to swim when you haven't had to before. And this just produces a lack of independence. Students are no longer in a scenario where there's that support. They wish they had that support. They're in a system where you need to be independent and you're just not able to process and work at that high level where you can take care of yourself in all aspects of life. What we saw a little bit was the rehabilitation versus accommodation. Okay, and I saw this within the research side and looking at healthcare compared to education, right? So observing treatment differences, there are kind of big differences here. So if you're looking at the picture with the cast here, an example that I really like to use is if the way that the medical system would treat a broken arm. So for this person, it looks like they avoided surgery. They've got their cast on after a broken arm. They're going to wait 6 to 8 weeks. The cast will be cut off at that time. You'll go to a physiotherapist. The physiotherapist will put some exercises in to start strengthening that muscle around, because you're better off with 2 hands than you are just one. The way education works when it's looking at issues like this. So if education was treating a broken arm, you'd say, okay, you got a broken arm, but you have one really good arm. So let's just tie that broken arm to your side and let's just focus on all the things you can already do really well. And let's focus on all of your strengths, right? But what we know about our body, and this is the same thing with the brain, is 2 hands is better than 1. You can do a lot more when you have balance on both sides and you're able to use both sides. And it's too bad that we're moving into this paradigm of really focusing on strengths too much, because I think it really is leaving some gaps in how we are developing our children, because there's underworking brain networks are underserved in education. We're getting away from that. That's creating some imbalance, and that can lead to, and there's a lot of studies showing that there is more anxiety and depression in children these days. Right. And the same thing would happen. Like, what if we only exercise half of our body? And we see this sometimes with people who really like lifting with their upper body and neglecting their lower body and like have chicken legs. But imagine, and you kind of see this with Major League Baseball players and pitchers, where one side of their body is so much stronger than the other because they're using that so much frequently. But what if one side just developed and we didn't develop the other? It would look different from the outside. And what we don't see, because the skull is surrounding the brain, is we don't see that there's an imbalance within the brain in those situations. So concerned parents are just plugging in supports with the goal of graduation. And the goal of graduation is nice, right? We want that for our children. We want them to be able to graduate and feel that success. But when the education system has that same goal, where graduation solves everything, and we're not trying to look at the well-roundedness of the human being who's leaving the educational system in that moment, we are doing a little bit of a disservice. And we have to plug in so many different supports. It can drain the brain. It can create more fatigue, and we're not really meeting the need head on. So why aren't these supports solving either the short-term or long-term problems? Well, what we know about neuroplasticity is neurons that fire together wire together. I've heard this since, for the last 12 years that I've been working at Arrowsmith, and it really hits home that, the brain, when you're able to fire up a network that's underworking, or a network, or any network really, we've been working with people with healthy brains as well to really build up the excellence in the brain. But when areas are firing together, they will create new connections, new neuronal connections within the brain. So repetitive exercises that stimulate specific regions of the brain can help improve functional connectivity in the region the behavior lives. Right? So the brain is continually trying to find the fastest route. So millions and millions of times over and over. And this can lead to hyperconnectivity. So what Howard was talking about, where the brain is so overworked. And we started seeing this in our research on both learning disability and brain injury, right? The way that a healthy brain would work, and I like to use this example as well. So depending on where you are, many of you are in the US or Canada. So if you're trying to get from Los Angeles to New York, the fastest way would be to hop on a plane, you put on a movie, you finish the movie, but by the time you get there, you're in New York enjoying your time, right? What happens when a healthy brain is working, it's processing something from right to left. And that's kind of where we're working with the clocks program that I'll show you in a moment. We are hoping that that's an efficient route and it's not trying to find every way, right? An unhealthy brain that's having difficulty with this, that's overfiring, that's hyper-connected, you're going to say, okay, well, I got to go from LAX. Now I got to go up to Chicago because that's a major hub for connections. Oh, now I got to go down to Dallas because that's another one. Now I'm going up to Newark, and then Newark, the quick flight over to JFK. You get to New York. You're getting from A to B. It's not that the potential's not there, but how much extra energy and effort has it taken the student to be able to process the information from the right to the left? Realistic and in the timing that they would need, this can be such a deterrent in education. This can be draining the brain by the time you're in your fourth period of class for the day, right? Where you're not actually taking in, you're not creating solid memories because it's just taking so much longer to process information. And neuroplasticity is not always positive. We can strengthen networks that are not serving us well, right? When our brain is overfiring, we want to keep ourselves safe. What happens in that situation is we're going back to our amygdala. We're going to our fight or flight system to be able to say, and the older we get from when you're 7 years old until you're 18 years old leaving, those networks strengthen more and more and more. I don't like math. This is what I say to my math teacher to not have to engage in this activity. This is what I do to avoid the activity, right? We create these networks of safety, these safety nets to be able to avoid, getting teased about not being good at math, creating distractions so that we can get out of them, being funny in class, right? There's a lot of things where, the neuroplasticity can really strengthen these negative networks that are keeping us in a false reality of safeness. We see this in PTSD as well, right? So if the brain network from our brainstem up to our hippocampus is firing up, and that's where our PTSD is living, the more we're staying back in that area, the stronger it gets, That's why you see anxiety, depression, and PTSD get worse over the years, because we just keep repeating the networking within that area, which is neuroplasticity in reverse. So one of the solutions we'd like to propose is Eaton Arrowsmith School and the Arrowsmith Program. So we have different options for this program. We've got on-site options at our school in Vancouver, where I taught for a few years before going into brain injury research. It is a beautiful school for kids to travel to if you're not in the area, or for those in the area being able to get to a central location, as well as Redmond, Washington. close to Seattle, where students from the state and even down from Oregon and around the Pacific coast travel to do more of a full-time program, because it does look like more of a typical school, full day schedules, full and part-time options and academic options. I am the program director at Eaton Arrowsmith School Online, and this class is really more geared towards fitting this into your everyday life, regardless of where you are. Some students do this before school, some after school, and some just take their computer and go to a resource room to strengthen while they're there. We also have weekend options as well. So what we would like to propose is shifting from surviving to thriving, for the brain to stop just getting to the end of the day and saying, okay, I made it to the end of the day, and just get to the end of the day, I did better than I've ever done. I am thriving in these things that I love. I was able to get through the things that I don't really like with ease. I am learning that I'm actually enjoying the things that I thought I was poor at. I'm developing my brain in all the areas to be able to support my independence upon leaving. That's the kind of goal we're looking for here. And Sandra Husel is a great person to chat with, to be able to get more information, to learn about our product and learn about our schools and which one might be the right fit for you. Where we really like to start is within the executive functioning areas. So clocks there with the red arrows, really from the right to the left, is helping to connect our right brain and our left brain. Right. There's also another connection that we like to focus on, which would be the area from the front of the brain to our hippocampus, which would be our working memory, based on an activity called predicative speech. The left hemisphere isolated on its own, we call symbolic thinking, and the right hemisphere isolated on its own, we call nonverbal thinking. But the optimal starting point really is with the clocks, the symbol relations. Having the connection from the right to the left brain is vital, and we do it through the corpus callosum. So students begin with clocks because it helps the two hemispheres of the brain, the right and the left, communicate, see the world, react to information faster. And research has shown that when this area is working as it should for the age of the student, that there's less noise within the frontal lobes, which we talked about, the hyperconnectivity, and help focus and stamina, which equals a higher likelihood for the flight or fight response to not need to kick in. And when the frontal lobes are working calmly and efficiently, there are global improvements that can set the brain up for future improvements at a higher level in all areas. This is allowing the brain to focus on more things happening at once. When you're focusing on more things at once, you're taking more clues in. When you're taking more clues in, you have a higher chance of holding on to memories, right? So, for those of you who have been around for a while, you might think back, you might hear a song in the car and you're like, whoa, I haven't heard this song since I was a kid, and I was at the dentist and I was feeling scared and anxious and I didn't want to go in to see them. And all the words are coming back, and all the lyrics and the tune to the song. And there's so many emotions tied to that memory to be able to hold on to where you were, who you were with, how you were feeling. The more clues that we're able to take in a moment to be able to hold on to a memory, the better likelihood we have of holding on to that memory for longer term, the smarter we're able to create our bandwidth for information, and the more we're able to apply that into our everyday life. So within a clock demonstration, I kind of want to show how we can use a clock to be able to target this part of the brain. So symbol relations, which we call clocks, but really is the relationship between different symbols that you're seeing at once. They help create improvements in processing concepts, understanding and grasping what we read and hear, gaining insight, helps with logical reasoning, seeing connections between different ideas, analyzing abstract concepts, understanding cause and effect, helps with our flexibility of thought and seeing different opinions, helps us accept and process other viewpoints from other people rather than just thinking that we're right all the time, making rational decisions, thinking critically, and of course helps with our memory because we're taking in more clues, and helps with our attention because we're able to focus and stay in our frontal lobes for longer because there's less noise that's helping keep us less distracted. So how can this tool help? From around the age of kindergarten, for some parents that are proactive, they do get their kids to read clocks at an earlier age, and that's great. But for most people, I would say 98% of the population, you see this clock on the wall in kindergarten, and you realize that there's a few things that you're looking for. When's recess? When's lunch? When's recess? When can I go home? And from there, everything fills in. Oh, when's my second period? Oh, I do this at this time. Oh, gym class is at 1 o'clock. Oh, I like that. I can watch for the clock for there, right? So we're using this tool and we're decoding this pattern to be able to understand what time it is. It's just a circle with lines and numbers. Our brain is decoding that whole clue to be able to tell us what time it is. We're putting meaning to that because different things happen at certain times of the day. So we're very conditioned to know that this means time, but really it's just a tool to be able to give us information. So it's important to understand not only what the correct time is, but how do we know what the correct time is? So if we're looking at a clock like this, a lot of people would say, if they're making a mistake and reading this wrong, oh, it's 2 o'clock. Oh, you want an exact time? Oh, it's 2:56, right? But really there's two symbols here that are telling different stories, right? So if I'm looking at this 2 o'clock here, this hour on the 2 are pointing right to the 2, it must be a 2. When we're in real life, if you're seeing just one thing at a time, you're not able to see the whole picture around it. We're going to be making judgments based on what we're seeing that might not have all the information. Okay, because in this, it's not 2, it's still 1 o'clock. It's not going to be 2 o'clock for another 4 minutes. It's still 1:56. So we're going through this process, looking at how these symbols relate to each other and trying to determine the correct time. When we do this repeatedly, when we're looking at these times, when we're looking at these clocks, we're trying to figure out which one is an hour, which one is a minute, and we're doing this over sets of 2-hand clocks. We're processing through and saying, okay, well, this looks like 5:30. This looks like 1:10. This looks like 8:02. This looks like 3:24. This looks like 6:37. This looks like 12:08. As we're going through that process, I'm forcing one half of my brain to work with the other, right? So if I'm looking back at this clock, the right side of our brain reads more people, emotion, situations, understands how we're feeling in the moment, understands how other people are feeling in the moment, gives us empathy for others. And the artistic brain that we see, is a lot of who's a left brain type of talk in schools that we see now. So the right side's more reading the circles and the lines. Our left brain analyzes information, reading comprehension, problem solving, detail management, finding the main idea in tasks. That's more reading the numbers and the spaces between them. So what we're doing is we're forcing the right and the left brain to work together to be able to figure out what time it is. And we're doing that rapidly to be able to get faster and faster in the moment, right? The brain doesn't learn speed. The brain learns patterns. When it has understood a pattern, it's able to put that at a faster speed, right? Just like you see with college football teams or NFL teams, they're going to walk through the day before the game, the plays that they need to go. Everyone knows where everyone else is in that moment because you can replicate that at a faster speed later on. So what we're doing is hyper-focusing to be able to understand these patterns, read them faster because real time of life moves quite a bit faster than needing everything to slow down. If we can pick up that processing speed, it's just going to help us out more. As we move through 2 hands, we go to 3 hands. Now we're processing this at a higher level. So 3 hands, I really like to compare to learning how to ride a bike, right? You see your friends doing it, you see your siblings doing it, you're like, yeah, that looks easy, I can do that. You got your training wheels on, you're kind of stuttering a bit, you get your training wheels off, you're falling all over the place, you're anxious, you're bleeding, but by the end of the day, you go, no, I'm getting this. You're processing that because there's a lot of things happening. There's the speed, there's the pedaling, and there's the pedal, the controls, the hand controls, and the steering, right? So once you put that all together, the brain at first doesn't know how to do it. It's trying to understand and process all the information to be able to make sense and do this activity very quickly. Then you're riding a bike, just like the old saying goes, right? It's just like riding a bike. We've learned this process. The brain knows how to do it. It accesses this part of the brain to be able to know how to ride a bike. It does it efficiently without thinking. Now you get your hands off the wheel. Now you're talking to your friends. Now you're riding to get ice cream, right? And as you get more and more proficient, you put less and less energy to the task. And that's how we get good at anything. We put less energy to a task And that allows our brain to be more efficient, to be able to do multiple things at the same time, to build on our knowledge in school, to allow us to do things with ease, right? And as we get more complicated within this program and move up and add additional hands and additional hands and additional hands, all while typing them down at this lower speed, right? We're processing more information. We're accessing the part of the brain that does this. We're lowering the amount of hyperconnectivity and overconnectivity in the frontal lobes to be able to stay in the best part of our brain for thinking and processing information. And we track all of this progress. We need to see how we're improving. We use this for goal setting. We use this for parent communication or student communication or participant communication, depending on the type of program that you're in, to be able to track how we're progressing, how much faster we're moving, how the accuracy is staying put, to be able to reach that goal of doing these clocks without needing to overthink about it. Making a difficult task easy, because this part of the brain lights up like a candle on the scans when we see people doing clocks. Right? So we're targeting this area just like going to the gym, just like targeting muscle groups. So thank you so much for watching. As you can see, the improved quality of life really is the most important thing out of this program. Clearer thinking we're seeing with students, less fatigue, faster processing, increased memory, increased understanding, independent decision-making. These all come together to help with an improved quality of life. And that is the most important thing. The only reason to do this is to help make life easier, to help make students happier, and to help improve the overall quality of life for a lifetime.
Yes, and thank you, Josh. It was great to be part of this, and we look forward to the questions afterwards.